Hey, welcome back everyone. Robert Marzullo here from Ram Studio Comics, and today I'm going to show you how to do some basic paint work, some digital paint work to this rough sketch. So let's go ahead and jump on in. Basically, you see I've got a rough sketch that I started out with, nothing too refined. It's actually pretty loose and messy, and that's fine. I'll go ahead and duplicate a layer. First thing, generally, whenever you go to paint, you want to drop in some kind of background. It's a bad idea to paint against white. It's not going to give you a real representation of the colors if you do that. So let's just go ahead and pick like a gray, something like this. Drop that in right here. And we'll start working up over top of this. The first thing I want to say is that I think it makes the most sense to fill this in. You can draw it in, you can select it and flood fill it, but you want to have a base color underneath the line work for your perimeter shape. So let's go ahead and do that first. I'll just go ahead and draw this in. So I'm holding R to rotate, spacebar to move the screen. And I'll just draw in a selection. It doesn't have to be perfect, but because obviously this is meant to be a little bit of a a bumpy kind of texture feel to the creature anyways. So don't strive for these perfect selections. If you want to be more critical about it, you can draw these in, and you can even do a click in with the polygonal tool, which is right here. Polyline, it's called here. It's polygonal on Photoshop. So you can actually just click around, get really close, and just click around. But I find this to be a little bit quicker once I get moving pretty well here. But see, I'm not worrying about staying exactly to that line work. And you can kind of just do the outside shape, because once you've got that, you can just do one big grab through the middle. And actually I need to, with this particular type of tablet, I'm using an Intuos 3, just so you're aware of the hardware. You can see my lines are a little bit shaky compared to what I would do on my Cintiq or iPad Pro. But I just wanted to use this tablet because I like to show people that it can be done with whatever device you want. You might I'm out of practice with this one, as you could probably see, but you can get better and better with it. And I'm probably being too critical in that spot. And let me show you the polyline, because actually that's another way to compensate. If you're not feeling as comfortable with the freehand method, you can use the polyline. And just click through. You got to make sure with this one you remember to let go of shift. So you only have to hold shift to add to the selection, but then you have to let go of shift or it will force you into straight lines. And well, they're all straight lines, but it'll actually snap to 45 degrees or something like that. So now I'm just going to go around this. And if you want this really nice and clean, just zoom up further. This is adequate for what I'm doing here. Double click to release. Spacebar to move. Just repeat this process. So that's how you use the polyline. I am going to keep with the lasso version though, especially up here where I know I can get away with a little bit more inconsistency. I just wanted the spikes to look like spikes. And I should have warmed up, because what happens with this particular tablet, I noticed that by the end of whatever illustration I'm working on, I can definitely feel a lot more comfortable. So I've noticed a pretty good amount of difference from just warming up. It's kind of getting in the zone with this particular device. You see it's just a little bit shaky. Sometimes you can get away with pulling the lines quicker. And again, if the shape still looks good, you just got to study that silhouette. Like, I actually like that shape better. It's such a small difference, but it actually looks a bit more organic to what I want to add later. So you kind of have to pay attention to that as well. Sometimes you can get the shape to look a little bit better. Other times you'll lose something in the translation. But you got to remember too, there's lots of ways to edit this as you go. So it's not that big of a deal if the shape's not entirely right there. You're going to be able to manipulate and add color and paint work as you go. So down here it doesn't much matter. I'll just do some kind of weird shape there. this really matters. And back to the spikes. Now the other thing is I'll rotate the canvas to where I feel most comfortable with pulling these lines. And then I can kind of test by ghosting over it. Probably a little bit more rotate, something like that. So you want to really make it easy on yourself. When you can, you'll pick up speed. And this is really worth doing because if you don't take the time to do the solid fill, I think the paint work can come out a bit more light feeling. It doesn't have the same kind of vibrancy to it. So you just want to get that flood fill in first. And not everybody. Some people paint without it and it comes out fine, but I think that for beginners it's kind of a good starting point. Because I'll see a lot of work where people ask questions, why aren't my colors coming out so nice or whatever, and you could tell they just kind of didn't allow enough saturation or enough opaqueness to the work, so it just doesn't have a vibrant feel to the colors. So this can kind of help that right from the start. So we'll just kind of finish this off, holding shift, spacebar to move, and there we go. I probably could have time-lapsed that, right? And double click rotation and that'll straighten us back out. Now the color scheme I want to go for is like a purple flood fill for the start. So what I'm going to do is do this, just double click here, call it flood fill, and let's pick a purple. Where's my color tool? Purple's over here somewhere. So just a purple base, and it doesn't really matter. I'm going to let this go a bit more saturated, but you know, just keep in mind you can control saturation all through the process. But there's that. So we've got our flood fill. You can hit Command Shift I or go to Select Invert Selection. See how it just selected everything outside of that. I can even go back to the line work and delete any indiscrepancies outside of that. So go back to the flood fill. We'll just lock transparency here. And the nice thing about this is that we can generate a selection from the flood fill at any time. As simple as going right click, select from layer, create selection. Bam, there we got a selection. And then we can lock transparency and not paint outside of this area as well. So what I want to do is first get in here and do some shadows. Like one of the first things I like to drop in is a almost like a gradient, but I just do it with a large brush, large soft brush. Let's open this up, stronger, set the multiply, whatever, but I just want to do a shadow from the bottom up. You know, light generally comes from the top, right? So just as simple as that, you know, we get this immediate kind of light source going without a whole lot of effort. Just something to get the gears turning. You know, we can get in here in detail, but I actually recommend just doing it in stages, like just this amount right there, nothing too crazy. That already gives us an idea for where the light source is, and then we can start painting in some effects. So what I like to do is paint over top of the line work as I go, and then slowly let this disappear and, you know, blend back into the artwork. So with that, I can go over top of the line work here. I can add a new layer. I'll just call this highlights, HL. And let's set this to glow dodge or add glow. And what I want to do here is just pick a really highlighted version of this. And there's a lot of ways to do it. I actually like using the pencil tool or the smooth watercolor. So let's go to smooth watercolor and start there. And what's nice about this brush is you can paint it in and you can blend it all with one brush. So you can get that hard edge on the one side and that soft edge on the other if that's what you're looking for. And just start painting in a little bit of light source. You know, we're getting that segmentation in there a little bit. You can blend it off, let it, you know, kind of fade this way or wherever you want to take it. Another way that I like to paint is just with the pencil tool of all things, and I'll play with the opacity. And this seems like an extra step, but I really like the control it yields. So what I'll do, say I want something on the cheek here, I'll draw this in, kind of paint it in like this. Then I'll grab this smudge brush and blend. So again, it seems like an extra step, but it really does offer a fair amount of control, and it's just another one of the techniques that I like to use when painting in my, my highlights. So you see I kind of blended that all out, but I'll do that at times because I want to slowly work up to it. In fact, I'm going to blend a lot of this back because I feel like sometimes the subtlety is very, very good, especially in the beginning. Like if you go too far too fast, you might commit to a bad decision. So I'll just kind of slowly pick at it, throw in some shapes, and see what I see. So I'll just kind of go around this, pick out some areas, paint in some light source. I'll use a bit more highlight or specularity on things like the teeth, obviously, so that they stand out a bit differently from the skin, even with the same tone at this point. Same thing for the spikes. And if you're worried about going outside of this edge, remember you can always clean it up by reverse select and delete, but you can also just go here, right click, select from layer, create selection, and just keep painting away to your heart's content without worrying about going outside of that edge. And then I'll also add some rim lighting to some of these segments, especially on the top of the head. I might beef this up a little bit brighter. So just so it gives it a bit more depth. And some of these areas back. Oh, quick mistake there. You got to remember when you make that selection to jump over to the other layer. How much of that did I do on that layer? Okay, right there. My bad. Be careful, folks. It's really easy with layers to forget what layer you're on, like I just demonstrated there. But I assure you, layers are your best friend when doing this stuff. You can really come up with some pretty neat effects. And you see just already we're starting to get a bit more shape going, a bit more depth. I'll jump back to the smooth watercolor. This is a brush that, once you get really used to it, you can move pretty quickly. Because again, it's got that ability to blend and add paint. So you press hard for paint, and then just the weight of the pen pretty much, or depending on your tablet settings, that's going to vary. But just kind of smudge it around, and this is kind of neat too because sometimes you'll get a cool shape you'll see. So at first you're just kind of throwing it in there because light comes from the top. You're thinking about your light source. You're thinking about what colors you want to add to make this look more dynamic and either realistic or more animated, whatever you're going for. But then as you start to paint some of these shapes in, you start to kind of see things and go, okay, wait a second, it'd look cool if I added this texture or this amount of detail or a little bit more specularity to this area, things like that. But one thing I noticed with this is you want to do some of it from a distance back here, but I don't feel the level of control that I like for detail work with this particular brush unless I'm zoomed in. So that's where I'll jump to things like the pencil tool and just do the blending by a secondary step, or with a secondary step. See that? Little highlights over here even. Because right now I'm mainly just trying to paint the higher surfaces. Anything that's kind of raised for the character. So even though a lot of this will probably get pushed back as I shade and things like that, I still want to raise out some of these areas. Just like that, blend it over. Okay, let's keep adding in some highlights. And remember too that you can change your blending mode at any time, or combined modes are called, with Clip Studio or Manga Studio 5. But I think we'll go with that. Let's try add glow, and it brightens it up more. Glow dodge, color dodge. Yeah, so we can play around with these, but we're really going to build up again with layers to get the effect that we're after. We'll just start here because this doesn't need to be entirely vibrant. So the other thing that you can do is use your selection tool. So you're going to deselect here. And remember, if you do go outside of the edge, it's not a big deal. It's easy to correct at this stage. But what you can do here is kind of start to build in some of these shapes that you want to see. So you can hold shift and do a few of them at a time if you want. You just mix up a few, various shapes that you might see in the scales. You don't have to be too overly critical, again, with this because lots of ways to edit this. But use a soft brush, just kind of blend some of that in there. Command D to deselect. And you can really start to paint in some of your texture. So you can draw in your texture, you can use selections, whatever you want to do. You can create a brush for this. It's actually really effective. So after you find a texture you really like, you can just speed up the process by creating a brush. I'll just vary up the scales. Some of them would probably be considered like just plane changes as well. So you could do something like that on the side of this front part. You can always deselect and then hit Command Z and reselect. So you can kind of slowly build up to it, see what you like there. And then if it's too much in certain areas, actually I want a little bit heavier. If it's too much, you can always go back and blend the edges once again just by taking a smudge brush. And I do this a lot because I don't like the effects to be entirely the same all throughout. It starts to look like a stamp or it looks too repetitive. So I'll just blend certain parts back. And this kind of aids in that process as well as we start to build up our layers over top. Check it from a distance. So let's go back to drawing these in. I just feel a little bit more comfortable with this application. A little bit faster anyways. I'll brighten up the eye for now, but we'll actually add some color in this area later on. And you see I'm just kind of spacing these areas, like adding it and then leaving area for shadow later. So there's a lot of segmentation to a character or creature design like this. And that hot spot's a little too strong, so I'll just paint that, or blend that back, I should say. Just little by little, just like that. And we got to think about some light source even on the bottom of the jaw here. Do some of that. Kind of use a bigger brush and just go to the side here. You got to remember light bounces all over the place, so I think a lot of times we just like to light everything from the very top, and then it doesn't give quite the same dimension. So we got to think about light hitting all these underneath areas. Okay, and then we'll just go ahead and blend these back some more. And what's neat too is overlapping these shapes. So like after you draw these in, you blend some back, and you draw some more in. Just the kind of crossover gives you another texture. So you start to realize that as you paint, that the more and more you do this, the more kind of effects you'll get. And like Bob Ross used to say, happy little accidents. So that's kind of where I see that when you paint digitally even. You get some happy little accidents in there. That guy was a genius. Alright, so we're starting to get there little by little. And this creature is going to have a few different surfaces, so I want to try to paint differently, even if I'm using the same brush, but I'll even try to mix it up a little bit. But I want to keep this with some simple brushes, that way you can follow along pretty easily. But basically, I'll just try to paint differently on the areas that I picture being different materials or surfaces. So back here I picture a bunch of smaller scales and this kind of bigger, kind of organic overlap of the neck, and then back to some smaller kind of wrinkles in here. So even though I'm using the same brush, I'm trying to utilize it differently in those areas. I want kind of that skin that you might see on the side of the mouth when he opens up his mouth really, really wide. So I'll go up and down in these areas, and just the direction, but then varying up the size of the brush. Obviously using the bracket keys on my keyboard to scale the brush up and down as I paint through here and try to figure out these surfaces. A little bit bigger highlight right there. Really want to round out the cheek. I also got to remember that when doing this, I can't make everything the same. Like, for instance, this cheekbone is going to have an entirely different shape, so the highlight is going to be a little bit differently placed. You know, it might still be kind of top middle, but you know, I've got to picture the roundover of this surface, so it's going to be shaded quite differently than even this spike here or the snout up here. So just little things like that. Again, it's real easy in the beginning to just kind of put this singular effect over everything, and then you don't end up with as much dimension as you possibly could with a piece like this. Okay, so now let's put in some more shadows. We'll add a new layer, and we'll keep painting over the line work for now. And let's just call this shadows. And let's go ahead and set this one to multiply. And I think we'll put this under our highlights layer. And let's go ahead and use the same kind of pencil tool effect here, and then just brush this in. Oh, let's pick a dark, that would probably help. Let's brush this in and start to get a bit more depth. And kind of do a larger shadow through the entire piece of the brow there. Darken in some of the eye. Make the brush a bit larger and just kind of glance over. So what I'd like to do with these harder edge effects is really sculpt the work. So I kind of picture that he's got this really defined kind of ridge going here, this cheekbone. And I think it's helpful to make some areas where they're a bit more organic or spongy or whatever, even though this is a reptile of sorts, you know, beast, creature design, but you still want that variation in some areas being kind of hard lined and edged out a bit more with a more definable edge, and then some areas that are just a bit more organic and overlapping of, you know, flesh, skin, whatever you want to call it. But and then I obviously want some more shadows down here, because we're going to get some drop shadows from the head. So a lot of this is going to be shaded. And you know, just a tip, whenever you're trying to make something look larger, even if it's just a head shot like this, you shade from the bottom up, and that will immediately give a little bit more size to it. And generally that's how things are, right? You know, light, like I think I've already mentioned, light comes from the top in most instances. Now we are going to add a secondary light or color, or color, and that will help to round this out quite a bit. But I'm still trying to work in some of these, almost like texturizing at this point. Even though it just looks like I'm adding some bits of shadow, it will eventually lead up to some of this looking more textured. So I'm just kind of picking at it. And I really like using this light translucent kind of brush to do this, because I can kind of figure out some shapes. I can kind of keep doing this, and then some of the shapes will start to present themselves. So I kind of look at it like it gives my imagination time to catch up. So I'm kind of presenting little bits and pieces of the concept to myself, and then my my slowpoke mind can go, okay, I think I like that, or no, I don't, and just keep moving forward. But if I move too fast, then I lose some of that, I think. And then we can also zoom in and tighten up. So, you know, we're doing a lot of this from a distance, and, you know, it looks a bit mucky when you get up close, but that's okay. That's part of the fun. I think painting, even digital painting, should appear messy at first. It's more food for thought. You can't get to those good ideas without a few bad ideas. So you can kind of do some separation of the scales here and paint in this a bit further. Drop shadow off the teeth, whatever you're kind of envisioning. I'll start to shade more under this ridge line because I want to show the separation from that top bit of the mouth to the lower portion. And obviously reptiles of any kind are just great reference for dragons, and I think the more I study dragons, I just see two main elements, and that would be reptiles and birds. But then obviously you can combine all sorts of creatures. I think every combination has probably been done, but because there's so many variations, you can just keep going and really be creative with dragons. That's what I think is the neatest thing about them. Okay, so that gives us some more shadows, and I know this video is getting awfully long, but I generally will add a few layers to get to where I'm going. So I just want to give you all this information in real time so that you can follow along and really bridge any gaps. These longer videos are meant for people that are really trying to figure things out and are willing to sit down and spend the time. Okay, so now we've got that. And you see, if we start to drop out our line work, it's almost starting to read without it now. So that's kind of the goal. You can do things like tone back the opacity of it. You can smudge blend this into the work, whatever you want to do. I'll keep painting over top for now. So what I'd like to do now is add a little bit more of some soft edge effects in here as well. So I'm going to right click here, select from layer, create layer selection, go back to my shadows, grab an airbrush or soft brush, set to multiply, and I just want to keep adding in some depth. So I'm just kind of trying to round these forms out a little bit more. I paint from the bottom up there. Okay, and I also want another light source at the top, so I'm going to add another layer. I'll start with something like, I'll try Glow Dodge, and I actually want to add a bit of kind of a fuchsia or rose color, pink, whatever. It goes good with purple there, and looks pretty fantastical, which is what I'm shooting for. So let's try that. I'm just going to brush this in as a light source. Just kind of livens it up. Let's see if add glow, no, add. Yeah, I think color dodge is probably it. We'll keep playing around with it though. So let's just bump this up a bit more. So I want this to really bring this design out. Okay, and then from the bottom, I actually want to, let's call this top light. And from the bottom, I want to introduce some blue. So this is kind of more dramatic lighting, but it can be fun to do. Let's just call this lower light. And let's add kind of a neat somewhere in here, like just a bright blue, almost like a baby blue or something like that. And I'll start off with normal mode here, just to kind of brush it in, see where it's going. And I want this to look like it's either a bounce light or a light coming from below. This can be really neat to play with things like, if you got a dragon that's like over a pit of fire or something like that. Obviously, you'd probably use a different color unless it was a kind of a mystical fire. I guess you could still get away with the blue, but it's fun to do stuff like this and really see how much depth you can get out of it. And actually, what I want to do is introduce some of this to the eye color as well. It's almost like the eye is glowing blue. So it adds that fantasy element to it. So I'm going to play around with some of these colors here. And just keep in mind that when you're doing these effects, these combine modes are reacting to everything below. So sometimes you can adjust these by moving around the hierarchy, which things are above and below each of the other layers. But the main thing is that you just kind of play around with this and get some concepts going. And then you can select from this and even paint your own version of this. You don't have to use the combine modes to do all the work for you. You can actually use them to spark ideas and then start to grab from that and paint your own, which is what I find myself doing a lot of times because there's only so much this will get done for you. But they do help out immensely. So you can see just with that little bit of lighting, it's a bit cooler and a bit more fun. So I'll just kind of pick and choose where you want those. And then we can continue to go back in detail because what I want to do now is really use what's here, but then get in some more details and get rid of that line work. So where's our line work? Right here. Let's double click here. Line work. If I can type, there we go. And like I said, we can even get in here, we can utilize this as well. So we can just get in here and start blending this back. I do recommend always copying your line work so that as you start to edit it in any way, you still got it as a backup. But we can now start to blend what's here and use that to tighten up some of the work as well. So you want to keep elements of it. Well, it depends on the style you're going for, I guess. A full painting, you'll eliminate it altogether, but just to kind of speed this up, I'll show you how we can use this to just blend it back right into the work. And you can use a Gaussian blur under filter and effects, but it's all over uniformly, so I like to do it by hand like this and kind of pick out what parts I might leave. So like as I brush that in, I start to lose some of the eye shape there, that detail in there, so I want to keep that. So I'll just draw that back in as I go. But see, we got to remember too that at this stage it's actually behind that. So I'll just go back to one of my shadow layer. Just paint it on this layer. So if you're not good at jumping back and forth from these layers and naming them adequately, you can start combining really at this stage. You can actually make a copy of this combined once you get to a certain point where like, okay, I know where the details are, I know what I want to see now, I feel more confident in the work, and then you can start to eliminate it. I don't mind jumping back and forth a little bit until I'm entirely ready to do that. I'll just kind of keep painting like this and playing around with it. And you see once there's colors added over top, even if you add highlights to any of those areas, they're still taking on the color properties of what's already there. So that's kind of the neat thing about building up on these layers. All right, I'm going to tone back the line work like this and go over top. Or go back to the shadows. I'll just work into each area now. All right, let's go ahead and just merge these together. So I'm going to put the line work back to full opacity. I'm actually going to merge that with the shadow layer. So to do that, I'm going to make a copy of the flood fill, because whenever you have not selects, hold on. Whenever you have multiple effects, they need to merge down to this this flood fill for them to react properly. So you put that up here. I'm going to take the highlights, shadows, everything except probably that top light. I'll leave that for now. Right click, go to combine selected layer, and that gives us everything together. So now what's happened is the line work's merged in there, so I can start cleaning this up because I've implemented enough texture to where I can really see what I want to see in this design, but I need to start cleaning it up. And I can just keep painting over top, but I find this to be easier sometimes where now when I blend, the stuff that's here will blend together, and I can sample from a lot of what's here in front of us. So for instance, I'll tighten up some of the eye and show you what I mean. So I can take any of these colors, I can hold Alt, and it'll select from this. So if I see a light source I want, I can just grab that real quick, start brushing that in. You know, if I want a little bit of this white right there, I can brush some of that in. So it gave us a lot of this base information to work with to kind of start detailing to a more finished degree. If I want some of that black, and just grab it. So I'm just hitting that Alt key and then mixing it up that way. And you can really blend as well with this technique of just holding Alt and grabbing these areas. So it's kind of a nice way to finish the work, because you can get really fast with doing this, and then all of a sudden you're not going back and forth to the blend tool. But I'll be honest, I kind of use a little of everything to do what I do. But like even getting rid of that line right there, I can just grab some of this tone and brush it back in. But if I get into a pinch and it's not what I'm looking for, I'll just blend it back like that. So I look at this part like I'm just kind of cleaning up all the work. You know, I want to leave parts of that rough texture in place, but then I want some smooth areas to kind of contradict it and look more finished or clean. again, right here, I want to kind of separate some of this, grab some of this dark. I might even draw in some little details as I go again. Remember, you can play with the opacity of the brush, so if you're not getting the intensity of the effect you're looking for, just bump that opacity up and keep going. Another way is, get some of this effect in place that you're looking for, and then grab another color and just kind of brush it back. So again, just kind of playing with the way that you introduce the texture. And I think we'd see a little bit of this blue light on the bottom of the ridge of the eye as well. So we'll get some of that in there. And generally, whenever you see a light source, two light sources fighting over dominance on an area like this, there's going to be shadow in between them. So that always makes them look a bit more convincing. Probably going to touch darker. So just remember that. And then again, you can select anywhere in this painting and just use what's already there. So I'm trying to get rid of as much of this line work, especially on edges. If I'm going for a true painterly look, we're not going to end up with all that line work. It's kind of a bit of a battle for me because I'm so used to drawing comics that line work generally is harder for me to get out of there because I'm so used to leaving it for my comic work. But for my paint work, I have to remember that for it to look like a digital painting, the line work has to go. It's more transition of light, dark, and various color, various saturation. There's a lot that goes into painting, a lot of options there. Okay, let's pan back and see if it's pulling together. Yeah, and it's starting to read well from a distance, and that's what I was looking for. So I just need to repeat this process now throughout and really clean this up. But if I can get a detailed effect, even this close, it looks reasonable, then that's what I'm after. You got to be careful not to zoom way in here and you're like hiding details and there's a little bug over here, your signature over here. You can't really do all that, I guess if you got plenty of time to spare, but you got to look at it from a distance every now and then, check the work. And I think what I want too, that pinkish color up top looks a bit too plain. So let's see, that's our top light right here. Let's try maybe even, you can combine these as well, like you can do trying to find something that looks kind of neat there, a little darker and grittier, but what I'm trying to do is get a bit more color out of that. So what I might do is even just copy this and try another blending mode on top of that. So you can really combine these to get a variety of effects you're after. I'm looking for something a little bit more like that. Might even just introduce another more reddish tone to this. See if that fixes it. Oh, with stars. Yeah, I don't want to paint it with stars. Wrong brush. Yeah, I just want to richen up the color. I want it to look a bit more impactful. And I can play with the opacity slider if it's too much, or erase it back since it's on a separate layer. And let's try a little bit of dark blue to the bottom of the neck here. So I'm going to punch this up a bit more as well. Okay, well, starting to get there. So now what I'm going to do is time lapse the next part, because this will be just repetition of what I've already showed you here. So I'm going to take what I did here, go through the rest of it and detail the work and clean it up and see what we come up with. So let's do it. All right, so there you have it. That's the final rendition of it. You know, you could really go as far as you want with the detail, but that's pretty good. And for the areas that look a bit light, the final things that I'll usually do to adjust it are go to edit. You know, you got to merge it together first, make a copy. Tonal correction, probably level. You know, mess with the levels. You can also mess with the hue saturation, but I'll tend to bring out the darks a little bit more. And a lot of that texture we overlaid and built in will start to come out. And then you can control that by, well, there's correction layers on here, but really you can just go duplicate layer and say you wanted some of this desaturated. You could kind of do some of your own corrections as far as hue saturation. I mean, obviously you can do all these cool effects where you see what it looks like in different colors. That's always fun. Ooh, that's kind of spicy. But I kind of liked where it was. Oh, that one's pretty sweet too. So yeah, this is a lot of fun, kind of psychedelic. Get your black light out. But let's see. Take this, go to saturation, knock it down a bit. And generally with less saturation, it's going to appear more serious and, you know, kind of a bit more realistic, I guess, if you could call a dragon realistic. But what you can do is by adding a layer over top and doing this, you can actually erase where you want the saturation. So this is a nice way to just really be specific on the areas you want to be the most saturated, the most, in a sense, the most detailed or most vibrant, I guess. So just little tricks like that, and that's it. So I know this was a long video. Hopefully you've enjoyed it. I'd love to know what you think in the comment section below. I'll make sure there's a link to my other video course content if you like the longer, more explanatory type stuff. I do courses on Udemy and Skillshare. I'll make sure there's links below. And yeah, let me know what you'd like to see in the future. I'll make sure to get that on the channel. And thanks very much for tuning in and watching. I hope you learned a few things. As always, keep drawing, keep having fun, and I will talk to you soon.